Hey, this is Austin from OK Tool Co. And today we're going to work on an axe.
Well, wait a minute. Let's pause this for a little bit. So this is an axe that Austin found. It's a scout axe, and he wanted to restore it and pass it over to me. So we thought we'd do a collaboration. Austin has his own channel, OK Tool Co. I'll leave a link for it in the description below. When he finished working on the axe, he sent it over to me. What the? So this is the package I received from Austin. He sent me, it's a Boy Scout axe that was in really bad shape. Really, check out his video. And again, there will be a link in the description below to his video. His channel's pretty new, but check it out. So it's a Scout axe that was really mushroomed badly, and he cleaned it up really well using vinegar. He used super blue, Birchwood and Casey super blue. It's something I think I should try. It looks like it gets things a little darker than the perma blue. But he did an awesome job on this axe, and I'm going to put a handle on it. You can see there the stamp for the Scout emblem is really faint because of the pitting and the rusting that this axe has seen in its past. So I want to draw out a handle for this. I made a pattern following the plum patterns that were used for these Boy Scout axes. It's a 2 1/4 pound head, and the handles were typically 28 inches long. So that's what I've laid out here. I created that pattern initially and then traced it out on my piece of hickory. This piece of hickory is 1.5 inches thick and should be able to make a really good handle for me. This is not the same piece of hickory from the same piece of lumber that one of my last axes broke on. If you want to see that video, you can check it out. It's how to carve an axe with an axe. It's a good video, but in the end, that handle busted, which was really sad. So now, since this is a Scout axe, and I end up doing a lot of Scout camps, I took it with me up into the Wasatch Mountains on a Scout camp last weekend. And I thought this would be a great opportunity to work on carving the handle that I had cut out initially. It was actually quite nice. I was up there doing service, cleaning up a camp after the snow from the spring. There was a lot of deadfall, trees that had fallen from the last few snowfalls that we've had here in Utah that caused several trees to break in the Scout camp. So we were cleaning it up for spring before they start using it for some of the summer camps. There was a lot of work to do. So while the Scouts were doing that work, I decided I'd carve a handle. I actually was only able to work on it here and there, but I was able to rough out the whole shape of the handle. Now, what I'm doing right now is essentially what I did in that axe carving video, where I carve an axe with an axe, except for I cut out the shape initially with the bandsaw. That's really the only difference. You can do a lot of the shaping with an axe after laying it out the way I did before I cut it with the bandsaw, but this saves a little bit of time. And since I was going to a camp, I thought this would be a good opportunity to save some time. Once I finish doing the rough shaping with the axe, I use both a rasp. This one's kind of like a cheese grater. And then I use this 4-in-1 hand rasp that has 4 different sides on it. It's a very handy tool to have. In fact, this is one that I carry regularly in my scout kit because it comes in so handy with carving all kinds of different things. It has 2 rough sides, one's curved, one's straight, and 2 less rough rasp files. So after I finished carving the handle at the scout camp, I was able to start fitting the head, and here I'm just cleaning it up, cleaning up the different files. Again, I refer to previous videos showing hanging an axe head. When you carve and shape the head, the top of the handle to fit in the eye of the head, it's kind of a precision fit. I like to set it on a couple times, remove it, clear off the excess, the spots where it's rubbing. It kind of tells you where you need to go further, and then put it back on again. I did this several times before I cut the kerf cut in the head. With the kerf cut in the head also, it kind of gives it a little more flexibility, so setting it the next couple times I was able to seat it a little further on the handle. And this last one, really I was able to get it down nice and far on the shoulder of this handle, and figured that was probably far enough. So it's time to pound it back off again before I set it on for its final placement. I guess it just needed a little more. So I used my double boiled linseed oil from Plaza again, and this is chemical free, so you can use your hands on it. It doesn't cause cancer or whatever, I don't know, regular boiled linseed oil that's got the chemical drying agents in it. And I oiled it and set the head with the oil. Now in this final setting of the head, I really want to make sure that it's set on there well, that the cheeks of the axe in the eye are really setting down on the shoulder of the head. I want this nice and secure, and I'm just making sure that it's set there really well. And I'm quite happy with that. It's really, really well set on that head. The shoulders are just about right. And because there's some extra at the top, I need to cut it off. I don't want to be pounding the wedge through that whole chunk of extra handle. This is a wedge that previously I was sent by Austin, so I think it's appropriate to use it here. It's a piece of hickory. It's a little darker than the piece I used before, and the grain orientation goes at a little bit of an angle, and I set it in there just right so that it would contrast with the top of the head. I use this hatchet both for setting the head on the handle and for pounding the wedges. It's got a nice long hammer pull that is treated or hardened rather. And so it works really well for pounding wedges in and pounding on the handles because it has a nice long flat surface to pound on as opposed to a hammer or a mallet. I think a mallet probably would be good also, but typically the mallets are round also. So with the wedge set in there, I just cleaned up the edge of it a little bit to keep it from chipping, but just enough to really put just a little chamfer around the edge of that. I leave it proud there at the top, coming out, so that the wedge and the wood itself kind of creates that, kind of locks the head on. So if you're not familiar with that, that's the reason why you leave a little bit of the axe head, the handle, above the top of the head, just so that it can really lock in the head. With that done, I cut off the bottom of the handle that I leave on until the head is set, and now I'm putting just a little chamfer around the edge, and a final sanding of the handle itself. Now, this handle, I made it slightly thinner than I would have normally. It actually feels really good in the hand as it is, but I am not planning on leaving this as raw wood. That's not the plan with this axe. I found a couple pairs of huge pants that I want to use to make part of the handle. This first pair is actually a pair of scout pants from, I think from the late 70s or 80s. They're official Boy Scouts of America pants. This other pair is just a pair of huge, I think 50 waist red jeans that together they really are the true two scout colors that make up things. So this is an idea that I've had for a while and been wanting to do, and that is to make a micarta type wrap on an axe handle. And that's really why I grabbed these different pants. In fact, I picked up the red pants before I even thought I would do it. A scout axe with intent on making a wrap on the handle. I saw them at the thrift store, and they just screamed to me that they wanted to be part of an axe. So here I'm just cutting out the fabric that I'm going to need to do the wrap. I'm only going to wrap it once around the handle, kind of like a canoe. I mean, that's kind of the image I had in my mind. When you're making like a fabric coated canoe, you wrap it in the fabric and then you epoxy it after. So that's kind of the concept I have in my mind. And I'm still figuring it out here. I cut enough fabric just to maybe lay it out, and then I'm realizing that I have way more than I need because I'm going to stitch this down the spine. So I decided to mark it off and cut it to where I think I need it. So I only have a little bit folded over underneath where I sew the seam. So I did this both on the green piece and on the red piece. Now, if you notice also, I laid out the pieces, so the green piece folds over on the front of the handle with that outside curve, and to make the curves work, it actually works really well to have these two separate pieces. On the bottom part of the axe, as the curve then comes onto the inside, it's more concave on the front. I put the fold of the fabric then on the back, and this allowed me to stretch it out to where the stitching would work on both halves, or both pieces rather. So once I've marked them out, I trim off the excess. And then this will make it so I don't have as much being overlapped again when I stitch it through. So here I'm folding underneath folding the end of the fabric underneath in both places while I'm stitching on the back or the spine of the axe. And I've got two needles that I'm using so that I can do kind of a cross an X type stitch on the back. I don't know what it's called. I'm not a home ec guy. I do sew a lot when I'm making crafty things, but I don't know anything technical. It's all self-taught, and I'm probably doing everything wrong, but it works. It works for me. I just make it up as I go. The thread that I'm using here is a waxed woven nylon thread that melts. In fact, that's how I finished the ends of each of these. I melted them. So this was somewhat tedious of a process because I had to keep tucking and tightening and pulling the fabric tight as I stitched it together to keep it in place. And at this point, it felt like I was making like a old like superhero costume or something. This looked like a superhero's leg with a red boot or something like that. I don't know. I thought it looked kind of silly. Now you guys won't be able to get that image out of your head. But once I was done, I trimmed off the excess, and it was time to epoxy. And this is a suggestion here that I received from a subscriber. It was to soak the epoxy in hot water, or to warm up the epoxy beforehand to make it more liquidy so that it would soak into the fabric better. So that's what I did here. I warmed it up before I mixed it. And this epoxy, this is the epoxy that I've used on my other Micarta projects. And it was way more runny, much runnier, I don't know, which did enable it to soak in. And it soaked in quicker. But one of the differences, or one of the things that I then had to deal with, as this epoxy sits longer after it's been mixed, it starts to cure quicker. So this, to fully cure, it's supposed to take 72 hours. But as I was doing this first coat, the epoxy started to steam a bit and started to harden before I finished the process. And because of that, it didn't absorb well into the fabric here at the end. You can tell it's not as dark, and it got globby. And because it got globby, it took a lot more extra sanding to clear it off. So after I sanded that first layer of epoxy down, the plan was then to embed a few of these snaps from the Scout pants into the handle. And initially I was thinking maybe I would use all four. There was 4 different pockets with snaps. But I decided to just go with 2 and to place them at the bottom of the handle, as I didn't want any holes that I drilled into the handle to be in any place that would cause there to be an integrity issue with the strength of the handle. So I just drilled some countersink holes at the end of each side of the handle so that then I could just, using some 5-minute epoxy, set them in the handle. So with those holes drilled and them cleaned out, this 5-minute epoxy I figured would be sufficient to lock those 2 snaps into the handle. And really all I did was just put a nice good sized glob of epoxy in each hole, along with the snap. These are cool snaps just because they have the Scout emblem on them. Just stop touching it, Rob. Stop touching. My gloves were starting to stick together by then. So with that done, I let that set actually for about an hour, and then I painted, or put a second coat of epoxy on the handle to recover it and to cover the snaps. This was something I noticed on the first one. So I used this pastry brush that's this kind of silicone stuff. This is a Pampered Chef one I stole from my wife. She actually doesn't use it much. But the first time I pulled this off and didn't record it, and it was really satisfying. With the epoxy hardened, I'm able to just pull those out. And it left all the holes and stuff. Thought that was cool. So I thought I'd share. After this second coat of epoxy, my goal now was to get a nice, very smooth finish on the handle so that I could do a final coat. And in sanding it, I noticed that I had lots of spots still, especially where the stitching was, that needed some filler. And I thought, if I do a coat with just some of this 5-minute epoxy, that would fill in those holes. And it's a little thicker of an epoxy, and I felt like that could fill the holes or the bumps and stuff that you can see here. And with a quick sanding after, I could then coat it with a final nice thin layer of glossy epoxy to finish off the handle. That's the plan. That is what I did. And putting this in was one of the things that if I went back I would change. So after it dried, I gave this again an hour to dry, and then it dries hard enough to shape, whereas the other epoxy I'm using takes about 24 hours to cure completely, enough that you can sand. So with that done, I started coating it, and this is where I noticed my mistake. So the 5-minute epoxy dries a little hazier, milkier than this other epoxy. It's a little darker, and because of that, I have some kind of blotchy spots that you can see through the handle. Once that was done, I let it sit for 24 hours again and called it good. It was time now to, remove this tape, remove Austin's original tape. I still hadn't seen the edge of the axe since he sent it to me, because the tape left a little bit of residue. I cleaned it up with some isopropyl alcohol, and it was time to test this axe. So I really enjoyed this one. Working with Austin was great. He's new to YouTube. He's been on Instagram for a while and has been restoring axe heads for quite a while and doing custom axes for a lot of people. And he did a really great job with this Scout axe head. He was the one that found the head, knowing that I like scouting so much. He wanted to get this Scout axe head for me. And I thought it would be a great opportunity to help him grow his channel and to do a collaboration with him. And I wasn't disappointed. He did an awesome job. I love how it turned out. And doing this handle was a fun one too. Truly, this is a first-time concept. I learned a lot of things that I would do differently on this. For instance, I wouldn't use 2 types of epoxy. But truly, it turned out great. It felt great chopping. Although I do think that this type of handle maybe isn't the best for a chopping axe. It probably is better for something like a throwing axe. Austin does a lot of axe throwing. So I'm looking maybe in the future to do another axe for him that I can send out, that he can test how durable this type of micarta handle wrap does with axe throwing. It was a great project. It really gave this old head new life. So look for opportunities to give those old things new life. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Hit that notification bell also so you'll be notified when my next videos come out. And we'll see you on the next video. Ciao.